Welcome to the Plato Paradigm, a paradigm shift in reading Plato's dialogues. Episode 35, Euthyphro 3e to 4c. Socrates has just said that it's unclear what will happen in the future in the law court, except to you fortune tellers. In other words, Socrates is distinguishing himself from fortune tellers, while earlier Euthyphro had included Socrates with him among fortune tellers. Euthyphro now replies, Al isos udenestai o Socrates pragma, ala sute kata nun agonieten dicen, oimai decaemeten emen. But perhaps there won't be a problem, Socrates, but according to sense, you will win your case, and I think I'll win mine. The words win and case here should be talked about. To win, the verb here is agonizo, which is compete. So Euthyphro is thinking of the case as yet another rhetorical argument, almost an heuristic argument which can be won. And the case here, he has forgotten that Socrates called it a graphe, and he's gone back to calling it a dike, which is what he has. Euthyphro has a dike, and that's what he ends on. I think I'll win my dike. Plato has put in something here which neither Euthyphro nor Socrates can appreciate, but we, the readers, can, and that is that Euthyphro is very wrong. Socrates will not win his case. He will be found guilty and sentenced to death. Fortune-telling is not a science. Socrates will treat Euthyphro's prophetic ability as a sophia, because Euthyphro himself treats it like that, as we saw when Euthyphro said that there is nothing which is prophesied which is not true. If Socrates is going to change Euthyphro's mind on anything, he has to know what Euthyphro's mind is, what the opinions are, how they contradict each other, and so on, and gradually Socrates will be able to contrast certain opinions in the hope that Euthyphro will realize that something is wrong. The first thing is to find out what Euthyphro's dike is, and incidentally, Plato will then have given us, the readers, two cases which we can compare. The graphe of Socrates and the dike of Euthyphro, both held in the court of the Archon Basilius, because both cases pertain to offences against the gods. Estinde de soi o Euthyphron tis he dike, fuges auten e diokes, dioko. And what is the case you have, Euthyphro? Are you fleeing or pursuing? In other words, are you defending or prosecuting? Dioko, tina, hon diokon au doko mainestai, tide petominon tina diokes, po lugede petestai, hoscetun chaneon iu mala presputes, tis hutos, ho emos poter. I'm pursuing. Whom? By pursuing whom, I seem to be mad. What? Are you pursuing someone flying? That's a proverbial expression. Far from flying, he's someone who happens to be very old. Who is this? My father. Note that yet again Euthyphro appears to be mad for doing something. He's always doing something which is against popular opinion. People do not prosecute their own father. That's mad. Note that the observation that pursuing someone flying wouldn't work if we translated the verb as prosecute, because prosecuting someone flying doesn't have the same effect as pursuing someone flying. That is mad. Wordplay is one of the first casualties in translation, and this is particularly true in Platonic dialogues. Socrates reacts as the many react. This is not necessarily how Socrates himself feels. Hossos o beltiste, panomenon. Your father, O best of men? Indeed. Estide tito enclema caetinos hedike, phonu, O Socrates. And what is the charge, and about what is the case? Murder, Socrates. Herakles, pou o Euthyphron agnoetai hupoton polon, hope pote orthos eche, ugar oimaigetu epituchontos, auto praxai alla poro pu ede Sophias elaunontos, poro mentoi nediau Socrates, by Heracles, or Hercules. So I suppose, Euthyphro, that it is not known by the many where the right state is. For I don't think that it is of someone by chance to do this, but someone who is far advanced in Sophia. Yes, indeed, far advanced by Zeus, Socrates. The many disagree with Euthyphro, therefore the many must be wrong. They are the ones who don't know what is correct in this situation. Euthyphro is the expert. This has now been settled. Euthyphro agrees with Socrates that Euthyphro has the Sophia required to be able to prosecute his father for murder. I've been reading from the old Oxford edition, edited by John Burnett, but there's a new edition which hardly differs from Burnett's edition, but here there is a slight difference. They retain a word which is in the manuscript which Burnett had omitted, and that is orthos, correctly. With this reading, Socrates doesn't suppose that it is of someone who does things by chance correctly who does this, while in Burnett, he doesn't suppose that it's someone who does it by chance at all who does this. It's implied either way that Euthyphro must be correct because he has Sophia, and to dare prosecute one's own father for murder is the act of an expert. If Euthyphro is prosecuting his father for murder, he must have a good reason, and Socrates attempts to discover what that reason is, and he can only think of one possible reason. Estinde ton oikeon tis hotethneos hupotus hupatros, deilade, ugaran pu huperge alotriu epexes thephonu auto. So this person who was murdered by your father must be one of the household, obviously, for you wouldn't prosecute him for murder of someone outside the family. Prosecution for murder in the ancient world was the responsibility of a relative of the murder victim, and this extended to the wider household, which is the case here. Socrates is asking whether the murder victim is a member of the household, not just of the family. And he thinks this is obvious because one wouldn't prosecute the father of all people for murder of someone who isn't even a member of the household. The way Socrates asks this question does suggest that he already knows the details of this case, because the question asked in this way will provoke Euthyphro into giving a very defensive answer. We'll find out a bit later that Euthyphro has already been able to practice this answer with relatives of his who are very upset that he's prosecuting his father. I should point out that the term killed is not a literal translation. Literally, Socrates talks about the person who has died by your father. This is because in Attic there is no passive of the verb to kill, and instead they use the verb to die. Socrates would use this verb to die whether he thought the victim had been killed or had simply died. We come now to Euthyphro's description of the events leading up to this prosecution. It's quite long. We will only begin the description this time. But the first part here is more of a defense, why Euthyphro would even consider prosecuting his father. The language he uses indicates that Euthyphro has already rehearsed this with other people. Geloion, O Socrates, hoti oie ti diaferen ete alotrios ete oikeos hotethneos, al tuto monon den fulaten, ete endike ektenen hoktenas ete me, kai emen endike ean, ete me epexienai, ean per hoktenas sunestiosoi kai homotrapezos e. It's ridiculous, Socrates, that you think that it matters whether the person killed, the having died person, is alien to the family or a member of the household. But you don't think that only this needs to be considered, whether the killer killed justly or not. And if justly, then one should let him off. And if not, one should prosecute, if indeed the killer should share the same hearth and table as you. At the beginning, Euthyphro sounds quite progressive. The killer should be prosecuted if the murder was unjust, regardless of who the person murdered was, whether the person murdered was a member of the household or not. But then Euthyphro says that it does matter who the murderer is. If the murderer is someone you share a hearth and a table with, then you should prosecute. So while other people of his time were concerned with the status of the one murdered, Euthyphro is concerned with the status of the murderer. If the murderer is a member of the family, he should be prosecuted. It seems to follow from what Euthyphro says that if the murderer is not a member of the family, then it doesn't really matter. If the murderer is a member of the family, then you should see whether the killing was committed in justice or not in justice. He uses the words dike, justice, which, as we have seen, is also the word for a case brought by a private citizen against another citizen, as opposed to the graphe, which is a case brought against a private citizen by someone on behalf of the polis. Euthyphro also says that it's only if the killing is done not in justice that you should prosecute. In other words, he already thinks his father is an unjust murderer.